What the heck are fight back interviews? Well, put simply, they're interesting conversations with fraud fighters. We're not dissecting fraud processes or doing a deep dive into tech. We're talking to interesting fraud fighters who have a cool thread we want to pull on. And in doing so, maybe we teach fraud fighters something different and something new. And in order to produce and deliver this awesome content, we need partners. This Fight Back interview is powered by Authentic ID. Authentic ID provides 100% automated identity verification and fraud detection solutions that are leveraged by companies worldwide for customer onboarding, re-authentication, age verification, and more. Their patented machine learning technology detects counterfeit IDs and biometric spoofs with 99% plus accuracy in just seconds. And with that, let's get rolling. Hey, Cecilia, how are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us for our second ever Fight Back interview. So as I said to you earlier, I can't keep calling it second ever, third ever, fourth ever. Eventually that's going to have to stop. But we're really excited to have you here. And this will just be a really candid conversation about you, about your story, but kind of about some specific details and kind of where you've gone from there. And I know your story, but I think it's better you update people and let them know kind of why we're talking today and what led you to this point.
Yeah, well, if you've seen the Tinder Swindler documentary on Netflix, I which a lot of people have, but a lot of people haven't. I was defrauded, over 6 years ago now, by a guy I met on Tinder and met him then several times in person. Very elaborated scheme with both, love, danger, the entire mix that you can imagine. And I think that's why it went so viral. And I feel the story is still living today. But at the end of it, after I've been together, it was total 6 months I was around this guy and his team. I had lost over 200,000 pounds or $250,000. And all of it was high consumer debt loans. So I was in really big difficulties when I realized what had happened to me.
Yeah. And like you said, not everyone's seen it. So it's great to get that awareness out there. And kind of to that point, it's been like 6 years since this happened, right? And one question is, how often do you still think about it? How much is this still on your mind?
I think a lot of fraud victims wish that they didn't have to think or care about it anymore, but I have made it kind of almost like my life's mission now, and I do talks. So, and most people are interested to hear the story, and they say it's different when they see it on stage and when you have, a big production as a documentary, and to see more of the methods. So I think it's hard. It's every day,
Every day.
It's
How do
so
you not,
annoying.
how do you not
But
think about it every day? But
yeah, but it's you think about, the good parts that have come out of this as well, and you're trying to focus on what it has led to, where you are now, and kind of be grateful for that your story is, people want to hear it, and it is a story worth telling, that people are seeing kind of the lengths people would go to defraud. I think that was the big change with the Tinder soon. I was like, what, people are really that evil, even though, and I think it's a good way to show the same type of tactics that these fraudsters are using, even if it's only online or in person, or even if it isn't any money involved, what are people doing, mentally? And I think that has resonated. I'm still getting, messages every day from people around the world, seeing it for the first time and writing to me, I cried with you. It touches people, which I don't think I expected kind of that reaction.
yeah, and that's the power of it. And that's why talking to you and getting this out there on our platform, it was so interesting because it empowers people. And with the interesting thing, when we were talking right before this, it's like you've come a long way since 6 years ago, and it's almost like your story is in a different place. And so revisiting the victim part is, part of the whole story. I think where it helps people is it just kind of breaks down the stigma a little bit about being a victim. And I know you have to tell the story like many, many times, so I appreciate you telling it once more for us. And kind of just going back to that, I guess, because I think what's most damaging about scams it's the financial component, 100%. But also there's an emotional and psychological component that I think people have a tough time kind of putting kind of quantifying, and you can't
Mm.
quantify it, right? So, what was that like for you, I guess, as a victim, psychologically, emotionally, like that part aside from the money?
I I think that was the most devastating. Like here, it wasn't even the money I was thinking about first. It was more like what has happened in those last months. What was the words that were said to me, the kisses, the hugs. Like, was everything a lie? Was any of it true? And I think then going out into society and you're meeting. Remember, this is 6 years ago, and we have come further, but I was not very much. I had a bad experience with both police in Norway and in the UK, and with the banks as well, not truly realizing what social manipulation can do to someone and what you are
Yeah.
doing, even though. So I think it was really, really difficult getting out there. And then you feel you've been in, it felt like an abusive relationship, but everyone else was, or most people at the start was looking at you and like, oh, money,
Yeah.
tough luck. And you're like, but I need help for me,
Yeah.
what happened to me as a person.
The human element of it, right? Like,
Yeah.
and a friend of mine in the industry, Ian Mitchell, calls it human crime. I mean, like when you get to scam, like, when you have a credit card fraud, and listen, all fraud is bad. If you get your money back, it's better. If it's,
Mhm.
it's a spectrum, right? When you start getting into psychological and emotional damage, and you don't get any of your money back, like it's just compounds to a level of suffering that is
Mm.
unfortunate, which is why reliving it maybe isn't always the greatest thing, but just but that brings me kind of into like you're somebody that's come forward and you've done a
Mm.
documentary and you've really leaned into it. What would you say is advice to other scam victims who don't even really want to talk about it, which is understanding there's a stigma around it, there's lots of stuff, but like is there anything that kind of helped you take that first step to talk about it?
Oh God, I remember the first documentary that was made about the Tinder swindler because that was the Norwegian one, and it starts with me, that documentary, with me being all barefaced. I was like, you could see I was in the ruckus, and then the journalist asks, "Why do you want to tell this story?" And I say
Yeah.
straight out, "I don't want to tell this story. Really, that is how it feels.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to tell it,
You don't want it.
but I feel like I was so desperate that I felt that was my only way out of
Yeah.
about the difficulties that I was in, and to get people. The journalists were the only one who took this seriously. So I got healing through telling my story. So that is what I have to say to victims, because that is another thing. This has really empowered victims. I have tons
Yeah.
coming to me like, how did you make this? How can I want to, get the face of my fraudster out there because I really want kind of
Sure.
justice or help others. And that is what I felt, is that thanks to the great documentaries that I was part of, I gotten answers. Got to know that my fraudster was jailed in Finland. The report from his trial. I got to know so many answers, that he was wanted in some country. I got, and then I got healing through meeting other fraud victims, my peer support. Like I got so much from telling my story. So I think that is what I see in others as well, is that you feel empowered. You're taking your power back. I am not embarrassed about it. I've never been embarrassed. I think that is kind of rare for me.
Y-
I have never, like when people are trying to shame me, I was like, well, I know what he did to me. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I am
Yeah.
very strong in my faith. And then I has been really important, if other are reluctant, find the people, or find your tribe that
Hmm.
works towards the same thing. Dr. Elizabeth
Yeah.
Carter and I found Anna Rowe, these experts that are kind of, oh yeah, the language that we're talking about, meeting others that has really helped me, because I'm not an expert per se. I'm hoping to be in the end, but there's so many amazing people out there that you can learn from, and knowledge is power. That is what I learned. The more you know, the
Definitely.
more you're equipped.
Yeah, and we
Yeah.
come from different perspectives. Like I worked in fraud prevention, more in a professional setting. Having a victim's perspective, working at a bank, working in the public sector, in the government. Like there's different angles, and I think it's all cliche, like oh we all kind of got to band together, and but for something like scams where it starts on maybe a dating app, and then it finishes in a bank, and then you have the victim's perspective, and you have the person at the bank who's trying to stop the fraud and help the victim. But
Mm.
there's so many different angles here, so I definitely see that. And then, I mean, you went into public speaking in, I think it was February of 2022,
Mm.
telling this story. And I guess we kind of hit on maybe some of the hardest parts is kind of retelling and going, and And the best part of it being taking that power back and kind of being able to heal yourself while also helping others. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if you could expand on some of the things where you really like telling your story.
Yeah, like I think when I started, it was so emotional. I think it was a couple times when I went from stage, I was just crying because it was really,
Yeah.
really emotional and it just hit me because I go through the entire spectrum, you know. I talk about going into acute psychiatric ward, wanting to kill myself, to the trials with the banks that I went through. It's a lot hard-hitting trauma that you have to go back into. So I have come up with a way of kind of still telling my story. So when we go into why I'm telling my personal story, but I like to show as well, it's not only me. I don't want people to go away and say, oh, that was a crazy story. Thank God that isn't the norm. Or this doesn't happen. Or I want people to go from there, but like, but God, okay, but this happens all the time. This is just a personified that you are able to be on stage because there's so few victims that really want to, and I get it because it's
Yeah.
just awful. As I say, I'm not going up there saying I'm a top CEO, I'm going to teach you how to be successful.
No.
I did a talk during Women's Day in Norway, and all these other incredible women are up on stages, starting their businesses or investing. And then I'm the one finishing it off. And I'm like, yes, let us tell a story about how you can actually funk up your life totally,
Well,
but you can turn it around. And I
yeah, and
think
it's
that's
so
the
relatable
beauty.
to people who have, like you said, it's not just you. There's so many people that have been through this. So like
Yeah.
I do it with mental health, talking about anxiety and stuff. Just telling your story and making other people feel less alone is powerful. And it's
Yeah.
that first step, in my opinion, to then coming up and saying, hey, I need help, or I want to tell my story. And like getting over that hurdle is really hard. So when people hear
Yeah.
your story or others that are kind of at least leaning into something that might be really big and scary and stigmatized, it helps people kind of at least find a sense of comfort in hearing that, right?
Yeah, and I have to say, like I was in New York almost a year ago, and I was in Singapore in September, and I just feel like no matter where I go, the reactions are the same. The stories, people come up to me because a lot of them feel comfort that okay, Cecilia told her story. Now I can tell about my mom that was defrauded, or me,
Yeah.
or my grandmother, or my friend I had to go to the ER with. Like they are really opening up, and it's the same type of things, and it just shows how like how similar we humans are when you think about this type of crime. It's so we're
Yep.
just trusting,
It's just
and I
human. It's
and
human
I
people with brains, right? Like,
so I
yeah.
think my favorite thing is just that we come together on this.
Yeah.
This is something that I have to say is global. This isn't something particular. Like, and that is what maybe one of the best stuff is that when I go off stage and people
Yeah.
coming with their own stories or thanking me for speaking up or
Yeah.
that you're an inspiration. I think that is such a weird thing, but you are in the end because it's like it's not fun being up there all the time.
Yeah, and own it
Yeah.
and accept and let that like make you feel good because it should, and then it drives you to keep doing it,
Yeah.
and it's good to get that positive reinforcement, and because it's you're an entrepreneur, it can be a grind, you're finding opportunities, you're building a business totally different
Mm,
from what you were doing before, so that's it's not all positive feedback, and people,
no.
you're right, like it's not all that.
Yeah.
So when you get it, own that, right, and
Yeah,
enjoy it.
and especially I think still it can be a hurdle for people to look at victims as resourceful or that you have something. So remember when I started doing my talks, I didn't say like my profession or what I'd done before, and I
Mhm.
got feedback that you people need to know that you kind of it's sad. It's sad though. I don't feel it should matter that I have a master's in IT or that I was a designer and I worked on loan applications. For me, it's a bit fun to know that I knew exactly what I was getting when I was taking up the loans. I had been working in Norway with this. Um, but I think, as you say, it just shows we have the broadness of what a fraud victim is. And I think that is so important. We know we always comes out with different statistics on who's a fraud victim. But I think being on the ground, we can say it's not one one type. So I think
Yeah.
sometimes when we get these statistics, I'm like, well, even though if you have statistics that this elderly woman that it doesn't really help the bigger picture here, because I feel that there's a lot of dark numbers with men, for example, which I really want to speak more to. Yeah.
And it depends on the scam, right? Like and there's so many different ways that you can kind of manipulate someone's emotional and psychological state
Yeah.
that men, women, yeah,
Yeah.
there's different levers that you pull. And a lot of these people who social engineer people know that they know their
Mm.
victims very, very well and what will entice them to do certain things, which
Yeah.
is the mind-blowing part of it, I think.
Yeah.
So on the stigma topic, yourself and Anna Rowe co-founded Lovesaid in
Mm.
January of 2023. So congratulations on that. Very
Thank
exciting.
you.
And I noticed on the website it said a mission to change the stigma of emotional scams for victims and society. So you guys do a lot
Mm.
of things, but just tell me what does that look to you like? What does the stigma do to victims, and what are you doing to try and change that?
I think it's a stigma that has ended up where we are now. Why we are really feeling the knife on the throat, because we've been talking to a lot of banks, mainly though here in the UK, but to see how it has been deprioritized compared to other type of crimes. And we get it, because fraud has been viewed as a financial act. And like
Yeah.
as we mentioned, Ian, like the where I am with him, it is a human act. This doesn't happen in a vacuum where just
Yeah.
money just goes. So I think, and I did a talk that's like, by blaming victims of fraud, do we fall for the con ourselves? And I was kind of the perfect example of it. By the banks going after me and taking me to court because of the loans, we are now not going after the true perpetrator here.
Hmm.
And then with the police as well, I was made a suspect in my case in the UK because I had sent in fake documents that I didn't know was fake. Then they decided to go after me. And I think from the case, my fraudster is still out there and he has continued to defraud. And then we have media and society that when you then go forward with the story like this isn't like a murder case where the victim is very clear and or what could they have done maybe a bit before, but it feels that you are the one who having to respond to why you did what you did. And still to this day was a fraud victim in the US, and she was interviewed by Inside Edition, and it's like, but why did, and the interviewer is there, I understand that she's there, but why did you do that? Why didn't you stop?
Yeah.
Why didn't you? And I was like, oh, can we change how we're
Shift and yeah.
questioning here? Why aren't we asking what kind of tactics did he use? How was it for you? Kind of what can we do to stop it? It just feels, and I think that's where the stigma lies, that we need to always defend ourselves for a
Yeah.
crime that happened to us. And I think that is where we're thinking, like, if we can conquer that, we can really make sure that us as society, because police is in society. So when I was police and banks and everyone that working, we are around a barbecue and we talk about these type of things. What are the words we're using about these victims? How are we just stupid us? I remember someone said at the fraud conference last year in New York, like stupid us, and she said, well, we need to stop that. We need to stop kind of being annoyed, because as you say, when we're working on this professionally, we get tons of cases and we get tired. Sometimes we're like, come on, because you feel, but you get overwhelmed. But it's just to take that back, and I think having us victims up on stages to just take it back to that empathy level, that these are real people and there are so little data on the human consequence. And I think that is one of the other great grievances of mine, is that I don't even know the numbers. There was a new research that came out in Denmark where they've interviewed 14 romance fraud victims and families. 2 of them had committed suicide, and the third had had multiple tries. Out of 14, that's a large number, and that's Denmark. Like, so very, in a society where you're thinking, like, this is going to be okay for them. So that is what Lovesaid is like. We're working on different ways, presentations, police, banks. We want
Yeah.
to do training. So we just need to start there, start small, start advocating, and not be scared. I think sometimes that is just we are sometimes a bit scared of being tough with each other. Like we are a bit scared. I like that we're starting to speak a bit more up against, the big companies like Meta, and like the kind of responsibility they should have, that they have not been taken. And I really hope that is kind of the next thing that we need to do. But yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, that was a long-winded answer,
No,
but
no, it
it's
was
just
great. All that That's why you're here. You're here to
Yeah,
give
yeah,
us
yeah,
your thoughts. And
yeah.
it's a complicated problem. I think
Yes.
we've swayed too far on victim blaming. And then there's having worked at it personally, like in merchant fraud ops, but talked to lots of people in banking fraud ops. I haven't worked in scams, but there's a challenge in detecting these too, because it's the authorized person making. So there's challenges on both sides. Victim blaming for scams is not productive. It's not humane. It's not helpful. And then understanding, well, what are the banks and other folks up against when they're monitoring all different types of fraud, and this is a particularly challenging one. So not just to
Yeah.
say,
I get it's challenging. It's just that some of the examples I've seen has so much to do with how some of the banks, especially this is in Norway, where there was
"Hmm,
a new article that came out. It was a 70-year-old guy who has started to send all his savings to Bitcoin. And kind of was one team at the bank who started to say, hey, have you talked to this guy? It doesn't seem really right. Like, why is he
hmm,
starting, to transfer into Bitcoin? And the bank was like, well, he seems okay. And then there was, oh,
yeah,
hope he doesn't go on something. Well, it is his money, so he can just do whatever he wants. It's
yeah,
like
you
that
can't have
type
that.
of where I'm like, yes, I get it can be difficult, but sometimes they're not even
That's
taking the
well,
most glaring.
that's the that's a bar you got to get above. That's the a
Yes,
minimum expectation of what you know. It's more when you get to the more complicated ones, and
yes, of course.
it's a bit more challenging. But that's where I think there's multiple ways to improve our detection systems, improve how we approach this, improve how we talk to victims, not just focusing on reimbursement, which is obviously usually what most banks are concerned about, because it's like, hey,
Yeah,
am I going to lose money or am I not? But looking at all these different angles, and to quote Ian again, he talks about like banking with like a heart, and he does like the because there's like banking, and you want to be financially responsible and do all the things that obviously you're there to protect the bank, and it's bottom line, and everything that you're trained to do. And then there's the human, the heart component of it, where it's like, hey, there's a human on the other side of this, and what are they going through, and trying to blend all of that together, which that's the harder part. And yeah,
and
you gotta hit a base level of I guess vigilance
yeah.
and understanding, and then go from there. Yeah, go ahead.
But that is what I feel is that if we can move away from that, this guy with 70, all his savings in Bitcoin, to not just look at this as just his money being lost,
Yeah.
but what is this man is going to have to go through
Yep.
afterwards? That this is so much more his mental health, his capacity.
Yep.
What is it actually going to happen? What about us as a society? If he doesn't trust anymore, I just feel like that is where the training needs to come in on what is actual fraud and what does it do to
Yeah.
people and what that is what I'm feeling that and it will take some time, but I'm ready for a marathon. I said at the start, I was like, oh, it's a sprint, and I wanted things
Yeah.
to happen now, and I'm like, no, it's
And I just want productive conversations too, because like, I mean, you've been through an experience where, of course, interacting with banks and law enforcement is you've felt maybe the not so nice parts of how you've been kind of come after, and then there's people on the banking side where it's like, maybe they've been doing everything they can. They are looking at the human. They're banking with a heart, and then they're getting thrown under the bus because they haven't caught every single scam case that they've been thrown. So it's like some people, it's different perspectives. We have to find a joint place where we're being productive together and having productive conversations, maybe tough conversations, like you said, being
yeah.
tough with people, being tough with big corporations, especially, and stuff.
I truly believe like most of the banking employees we've spoken to have been so distraught and they really want to help. I
Yeah,
think it's more the processes around them and what they're
there you go.
feeling that they should be doing based on KPIs
Yeah,
or like whatever they have that they need to do.
whatever they're told, like, listen,
Yes.
this is what
So I think this is
yeah,
more of a systemic issue somewhere, along the line. But when they're
yeah.
speaking to a fraud victim, they are desperate. Like we don't know what to say, like they
And that's
refuse to
kind of
believe
my
it.
experience, especially with the frontline people. Like they're they feel real they feel real heartache as well. And
Yes.
and I guess that's a good segue to my last two questions. I want to keep an eye on
Yeah.
time. So to the fraud fighters battling scams on the front line, I guess your number one piece of advice when interacting with a scam victim, like what would you want to be feeling or heard on the other side of that?
I think it all depends. If this is someone that they're talking to someone that they know are being defrauded, I think because it's so stigmatized, if someone would come up to us and say that we're being defrauded, we won't believe it. Even when, one of my banks called me and said, "We know you're not using your card, Cecilia." That wasn't even being defrauded, but "We know you're not using your card." I refused to. Like, I was so angry.
Mm.
We are not in the right state of mind. I would love for them to ask more why questions, open-ended questions, letting us sit with the uncertainty, that kind of doubt, like, "So why are you sending this money? Oh, why? Like, this is my boyfriend." Like, for example, "Have you met him?" No, like, and then that you have to explain yourself a lot more. Because if you just go in and say, "We know you're being defrauded," it's kind of saying you're stupid, because that's just how it has been, and that you
Then your
should have
natural
seen
reaction
it.
is to be like, no,
No.
I'm not. You kind of get defensive, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so some of these fraudsters are really great at making them a team. This is the only person that you can actually rely on. They have been, grooming you to a certain degree. So you are sometimes looking at the banks as the enemy. So I remember it was just one great conversation I had at the end of my fraud with the Norwegian banking, and you could just feel the compassion in her. Like, "I think something is not right here, and you need to." She didn't even say anything. She didn't say you're being
That's
defrauded, but she's like
powerful, right?
something. And then I just sat there and I just hung up, and I was like, the pit in your stomach. And then it's that little seed of doubt. Just show compassion. And I feel as well, if someone is writing, maybe send some links to mental health, send link to Love Said. If you're thinking, like, send some information to them. If you're in an email chain, that doesn't necessarily go in here, but these are some resources I can think, and let us explore it in our own time. There isn't a magic thing you can say, unfortunately, because we are. But there are seeds that you can actually make us start thinking ourselves, and we will then explore, and there are, reverse image searches that you can give them some tools to make them realize.
That's where you need the training for that. Like, I've been on the front lines of merchant fraud, which isn't dealing as much with scams, but it's you're talking to customers. I was defrauded, I wasn't defrauded, but like, to a point, like, especially with this, you gotta be trained on how to ask these questions, and like, because your normal job is going through, investigating, finding clues, like, hey, this looks like fraud, this doesn't. When you start getting into personal interactions and how to emotionally connect with, or not emotionally connect with somebody, how to think of them as like that, that's something that it takes training and time to learn how to do that. Like, that's not simple stuff. So, whether you call it, your scam analyst, you have a scam center, you have people who have taken that extra level of dedication and understanding.
So that is why I always say, like, we have thought what people are saying to us. We already thought it. So
it's powerful stuff, like, and tough stuff. So I think the way a lot of these conversations, there'll be different topics we have, but I think the fight back was intentionally chosen for this interview series. And I want to ask you and all future people the same question. So that question is, what keeps you fighting back? Keeps you motivated to keep fighting back?
Oh, I have to say, it is the victims that are still coming and are appreciative that we're there. I think if we haven't have been there, I think that is my biggest sorrow. Like, I didn't have. That is why Love Said was created, because we wanted an organization to be there for people and be support. Not everyone has support, because a lot of times it's like, "Oh, go to your friends and family." Not everyone has friends and family. So what are they going to do? For me, it's an advice that, it's good. Yeah, you do that. But not everyone has that. And that is like, so I think, like, what keeps me continuing this is like, all the amazing other fraud fighters that I met now, that I just feel like, oh, we're so many, the energy is so amazing to be around. It's like, I know we will win. It's not even a question, that we're gonna get to a point where we feel like we're coming to a right place. And of course, it is the victims at the end of this, that they have a place to go, and they see me being at a much better place. They're just happy seeing me happy, that they feel as well, okay, Cecilia was there, look at her now, I can get there too. So I think that is what keeps me doing this, even though it's painful. Sometimes it's super tough. The highs are high, and the lows can be very low when you're doing this type of work. But it is worth it.
That's great. And I don't know if we'll ever win, but we'll at least be evolving to the point where we're making steps forward, and we're doing it in in a kind of a smart, kind of collaborative, with heart, with rational thoughts, smart business moves, and be compassionate at the same
Yeah.
time. And I think that's tough for people to kind of blend together.
When we get all these numbers, how everything is just rising, and I feel like, oh, we've lost already. The criminals don't need to follow regulations and laws, and I'm like, come on,
Yeah.
like I just feel like you need the positive energy that we
Absolutely.
can at least do more than what we're doing right now. And I'm
Exactly.
so sure that I think the coalitions that are coming up now, I really believe we will be at a much better stage than it has been. That's what I feel, because I love that there is a clear focus on it, because before it wasn't. So I'm like, and I think Tinder Swindler, from a romance fraud perspective, has really helped that. And that is what I am most proud of. It's like knowing that maybe you have made a difference in the world with telling your story. So
Definitely.
yeah,
That's a great place to end. So thank you so much for joining us for a Fight Back interview. We'll have this published out there and get the awareness out there, and for you and Love Said and all of your future projects, which I know are exciting ones coming up that you can let people know about in the future. It's an exciting future, and kind of moving on from that story, the victim component, to really empowering that, owning that, and defining a career and influencing other people who are still kind of in the earlier stages. That's great work. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I really appreciate it for all the support so far.
Yeah, of course. Have an excellent rest of your afternoon in the UK.
Thank you.